but everyone's in for a treat because this is a very special person and has certainly been out to the Met Gala in Spokane now, right?
Yes. Not
too terribly far from us. And just to give you a quick introduction, if you haven't read it already, it's Gregory Spatz he's multi-talented in many, many different ways, but he's the author most recently of What Could Be Saved, which is a set of linked stories and novellas. So he's going to, I think, read from that today and also tell us a little bit about what that means. And also of novels Inukshuk, Fiddler's Dream, and No One But Us, as well as short story collections Half as Happy and Wonderful Tricks. His stories have been in many publications. You can read that on his bio at some point, but he's also the recipient of a Mishner Fellowship, an Iowa Arts Fellowship, a Washington State Book Award, and an NEA Fellowship in Literature. And he teaches at Eastern Washington University in Spokane. On my Facebook page today, I put up one of the videos of you and your lovely wife playing some music together. So he's also in the twice Juno-nominated bluegrass band, John Reichman and the Jaybirds. So with all of that, we'll turn it over to you, Greg. Thanks so much for being here for Friends of the Winthrop Library.
Oh, you're welcome. So how do people support the library from this event?
Well, that's a great question. Anybody can head over to winthroplibraryfriends.org. We are working tirelessly towards building a new library, and we're very close to the finish line, actually. So we are asking anybody who's excited about libraries and rural communities and knows the value of libraries and rural communities to head over to winthroplibraryfriends.org and be a part of the team. We'd love to have you. Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, as you can see, I'm in my library. It's a small library compared with what I think you have in mind over there. This was actually my wife Caradwin made it. This used to be one of the kids' bedrooms, and when they left, we took it over and turned it into a library.
Fabulous.
So, I mean, I love libraries, so support the library. Okay, so I'm going to put on my glasses, read a little thing here to introduce stuff, and then I'll read a few pages and take questions. So, right, so I'm going to be reading from this book, What Could Be Saved, and it's a book that I've been calling Bookmatched Novellas and Stories. And the term bookmatched comes from woodworking. Specifically, it applies to violin building, which, as you can see from the cover of the book,
beautiful.
The book is all about. It's all about the violin trade, building, buying, selling, trading, playing, stealing violins. So what Bookmatched refers to is if you can imagine a violin in its most raw state as the trunk of a tree, maple for the back and spruce for the top, and the round of wood that the trunk makes. Book matching is the process by which you would split out V-shaped or pie slice shaped pieces from that wood round and then take those two pie slices of wood and match or flat join them back to back so that the grains run out from the center seam like a mirror image of each other. This is what's meant by book matched pieces of wood. The term, as it turns out, comes from letterpress printing and from books, meaning that the figure or flame in the two pieces of book matched wood should look like lines of text in an open book. And here I'll show you on the violin that I play all the time, which incidentally was made by Caradwin. You can see, I don't know if you can you see? That's book matched.
Beautiful.
So the grain runs out to either side. It's actually, it's one trunk of wood, it's the same piece, it's the same trunk. And yeah, that's what book matched looks like.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
It's a great violin. Anyway, so I stole the term back from woodworking to use it for a book. And, in the beginning it was just kind of like a joke that I called it that, and then it kind of stuck, and then, and then editors and people basically told me I had to take it out, and anyway, it's back on the cover. Anyway, so I think what I meant by this is that the stories and novellas, while they do have some more typical sorts of narrative links, shared characters and such, they should really stand alone, but they're meant to be twinned to each other and matched and they're meant to resonate against one another like pieces of book-matched lumber or the pieces of a violin. They share a grain and a figure and a purpose more than they share narrative links, although they do have narrative links. So that's what I meant by book-matched, and I don't know, maybe it's silly, but that's, so there it is, book-matched.
Beautiful.
So now I'm going to read a scene. So what it is 2 novellas and 2 short stories, and they all go together in this way that, you know, they resonate with each other, and they do have narrative connections. So I'm going to be reading a scene that comes from fairly early in the second novella, which is titled Time and Legends. And in it we have twin brothers, Guy and Nicky. They're 15 years old. Both their father and grandfather work in the violin trade. Their father is a notable builder. Their grandfather is more like a semi-crooked wheeler dealer and occasional builder. In a few years prior to the scene that I'll be reading, the grandfather has managed to obtain a store of very old tone wood from the estate of his friend Maurice Vallager, along with the rest of Maurice's instrument collection. So it's tone wood that the grandfather likes to say is straight from Antonio Stradivarius' workshop, either because he really believes that it is, because it is in fact, which that wouldn't be impossible, it's just kind of unlikely, or because he hopes to somehow eventually capitalize on the wood's mystique. No one really knows for sure. You know, they don't know if he's being straight or trying to pull something off. No one knows for sure. And so, and until the scene that I'll be reading, the story has been told mainly from the twins, these twin brothers, Guy and Nick. I've been telling it from their perspective as a collective first person we narrator. So this is the scene where that sort of splits. And I think that's pretty much all you have to know about it. It comes early enough in there that everything else is self-explanatory. If there's something I have to pause and explain, I will do that. The wood sat. Apart from those moments, we'd caught our father standing wistfully alongside it, hands in the small of his back, taking a measure of himself against the impossible metaphysical ideal of Antonio Stradivari, maybe, or just trying to ease the muscles that were forever cramping or threatening full seizure, the result of too many hours bent at his bench. No one paid it any mind. Occasionally, our grandfather inspected to be sure it was all there, part of his routine check of shop inventory. Glasses at the end of his nose, pen, stickers, notepad in hand, he'd go around muttering to himself, licking the tip of his pencil, and making his adjustments and computations. He'd sigh and shake his head and hum and suck air through his teeth. His hope, we supposed, was to discover that some of that wood was gone, secretly or unsecretly put to use in the construction of a new violin. But if apprentices knew of its significance or whereabouts, none of them gave an indication. Always they went straight for the higher, better lit shelves, not the shelves of stained and cruddy looking blanks breeding shadows and cobwebs. Some nights, reading, doing homework, and goofing around in the attic room where we slept, one or the other of us would pretend to hear the wood speaking through the floorboards and heating vents, words drifting up to us in a voice that was like a creepy old Italian or Frenchman back from the dead, or like our grandfather and Maurice, sometimes cleverly insulting each other, more often narrating descriptions of girls we liked in the grandiose style of one of the Hill family violin biographies from which our grandfather so often read aloud to us. Our observations upon the beauty of her bodaciously curvaceous waist and the resultant anxiety that should be manifest to all men observing the manner in which she farts and picks her nose is most instructive. Observe the fluting of her nostrils, though, smooth with a surface like that of clear, still water. Once on a midnight raid of the kitchen for leftover birthday cake, our 15th, we went so far as to sneak past our grandfather's bedroom at the head of the main floor stairs and down again to the shop to see. Everywhere our flashlights touched, there was the old familiar world, unanimated by our mood of giddy, half-spooked hilarity. The same framed poster illustration of a dog and a beach ball from a vintage Guinness advertisement, much loved by our mother. Our grandmother's portrait, also framed, sepia-tinted and leaning on a motorbike, goggles on her forehead, and a leather cap like Amelia Earhart's. The ancient porcelain urn of rose petals from our parents' wedding on a stained and unraveling doily made by our Canadian great-grandmother, our grandfather's shoes outside his bedroom door, laceless and swallowing darkness in the shape of his much maligned and gout-infested toes, none of which did anything to dull our mood of excitement. And in the storeroom, nothing, only the wood. Dare you? You first. In my mind were pictures of Stradivari from the few drawings and paintings of his likeness in books our grandfather had loaned or given us over the years, none verified. Portrait of a violin builder thought to be Antonio Stradivarius. A balding, bearded guy in knickers and leather apron, shirt with puffy sleeves gathered around the wrists like pajamas, bulbously huge and over-calloused hands touching the top of a violin like God in Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. Which of us reached first, I don't know, possibly both at once, possibly for the same piece, drawing out instead several blank sets together with a noise of clattering wood on floorboards, each of us glaring and shushing the other, laughing, then lifting them to look more closely, only to realize all over again, as we had when we'd first seen the wood coming into the shop, that really there was nothing magical or special in any of it. Just wood, after all, corroded and satined by time, a musty resinous redolence I imagined might strengthen or turn sweeter if you were to scratch the surface, a peculiar radiant coolness to the touch, as if the centuries of its age had somehow condensed and supercooled elements in its core. When a voice, but not the creepily accented voice of a dead man, and not coming from the shelves or the wood in our hands either, but from the top of the stairs, reached us, our grandfather's voice, as if he were telepathically connected with that wood and could be jolted from sleep at a single touch, as if he were wired to it in the back of his eyeballs, always on call. Who the hell? Who the hell's down there? What do you want? State the nature of your business. Hello? And then under his breath, damn cat. Hey, is that you? Anyone down there? We had just seconds to replace the pieces and duck further into the storeroom before he'd get to the landing and the light switch there, but no lights came. There was only the flip-flop sound of his slippers descending and then padding across the hall closer to where we hid, and then nothing. His wheezy nose breaths in and out as he stood admiring his plunder. A sigh, another deeper sigh. Oh, Francesca, he said, Francesca. This was not our dead grandmother's name or a nickname we knew of for her. It was, in fact, a name we'd never heard him say aloud until then. Francesca, what do we do? And then a noise from the back of his throat, which was hard to tell from laughing or crying, possibly neither. We stared at each other in the half-light, fighting to hold back the laughter and mouthing, Francesca? Who the heck? When I noticed under my brother's arm a blank of Strad maple, tucked innocently like a book, like he was just a studious kid on his way to class with some weird-looking tall and narrow art book. Following my gaze, he shrugged once, nodding his eyebrows and giving a quick head shake to dismiss concern and assert his fundamental innocence. No big deal, he mouthed. Anyway, the look said, we're in this together. Come on, we'll figure it out, put it back later if anyone notices or not. When our grandfather moved on from the wood to the front of the shop and from there back to the workshop, switching lights on and off as he went, squares of illumination doubling and brightening back through shadowy doorways to where we hid, we made a run for it, back up past his room, reeking of feet and the menthol compresses of Chinese herbs he sometimes wore at night to ease his joint pain, up again and sliding across the living room floor, silvered in moonlight from the front picture windows, fake bearskin shag throw rugs floating like clouds in a midnight sky, like reflections of clouds in a moonlit lake, and surrounded by our mother's heron-legged, collapsible music stands, open and musicless, and up again the final creaking flights of narrower stairs to our room. What would he do or say? If he burst in now, what would we say back? I had no idea. We leaned at either side of the doorway, listening and waiting. I watched my brother's Adam's apple and swallowed once reflexively with him, realizing as I did that I'd also been synchronizing my breathing with his, as if that would help us to avoid notice. When we were younger, the only way most people told us apart was by the rooster's comb of semi-transparent and faintly feathery hair growing under Nick's chin. I never had a corresponding ruff. Now, with both of us shaving every third or fourth morning before school, that distinction was gone, and others had taken its place. The development of bones and muscles through our early puberty skewing us unevenly in frame and physiognomy, one broader in the forehead like our father, me, the other smoother, svelte, and heavy-lidded like our mother, possibly our grandfather, though still we were mostly alike. Alike enough, most people mistook us for each other all the time. Francesca, my brother whispered. Oh, Francesca, the wood I've got for you. Old wood, real wood. And then both of us together, Stradivari Wood. For some time after, in our respective corners of the room, we didn't sleep. I saw him in the semi-dark, rising to tuck the blanket beneath one end of his mattress and then the other, and minutes later getting up to stand in our closet doorway, snapping down the pull chain lights of the room filled with harsh brilliance. Instead, he pushed past busted suitcases, hats and pajamas, boxes of old school assignments, a deflated inner tube, a game of Chinese checkers that made a roiling, spiraling racket of glass on tin as he lifted and moved it, looking for somewhere to hide that wood. Nick, light. On the balls of his feet, he hunched quickly back across the room, pulled the chain, and went back again to his mattress on the floor beside the south-facing dormer under quilts and pillows, where he flung himself down and seemed instantly to have fallen asleep. Happy now, I asked. He wouldn't answer. It wasn't a question requiring an answer. And long after his breathing had slowed and become regular, I lay awake picturing that wood blank at the back of our closet. I'd heard the theories, of course. The wood of Stradivari's era was so dense and perfect because of the little ice age affecting the trees he harvested, because some of it had soaked for years in a brine of seawater and kelp, because it grew from a stock of wood that was afflicted with a rare fungus late in its growth cycle, causing it to be less porous and therefore stiffer. I had heard, too, the stories about Stradivari divining tone by tapping on the trunks of live trees with a mallet and rushing out at the first rumbles of thunder to stand on a hill overlooking the forest and listening for the sound of particular trees split down the middle by lightning strikes in order to know which were best for tonewood and where to cut next. Legend, all of it. And here, supposedly like a tombstone marking the end of the line, the end of time and legends at the back of our closet under abandoned Hot Wheels cars and Legos and train sets and God knew what else, one of the last remaining pieces. Not a violin yet, maybe never a violin, only some wood. Each time I felt myself slipping off, I saw it there, felt it at the back of our closet, calling down lightning strikes, summoning past and future, opening a passage into the next years of our lives. One minute I was sure we'd find a way to backtrack, return the wood before our grandfather noticed, and go on with everything the same as ever. The next, I was just as sure this would be impossible. Like in the stories and fables we'd read or heard read aloud when we were younger, where a man or woman attempts to shift the pattern and course of fate by getting rid of the one object that most defines them, donkey, slippers, magical ring, eradicating the one trait by which everyone knows them, the birthmark, the beautiful hair, the tattoo, only to be caught in a trap of infinite and escalating repetitions. I'd return it myself, first thing, before anyone else was even awake. That was the thought that finally sent me off. When I awoke, my brother was already gone. I'll stop reading there.
Wow. Wonderful. Just really wonderful. Any of you who are attending here, you can type in questions, I think, in the Q&A. Actually, I think you can also raise your hand and you can talk, I think, although I need to be able to see your hands raised if that's the case. So either one is just great. That was just wonderful, Greg. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, I'm waiting to see if I can figure out if people's hands are raised or not. Actually, let me just see if I can just say, yeah, I think I can just put everybody to allow to talk, hopefully. And then you guys can speak up if you have a question. Maybe could you tell us a little bit about where those characters came from, those two boys, and how they made their way into your story?
That's a good question. I don't really remember. I mean, I had it in mind to write about twins for a while, and I wrote a short story. I guess I've written about twins a lot. So I had it in mind to kind of focus on these twin brothers. And then at the same time, I mentioned the Hill brother biographies. But
Mhm.
they were these guys who wrote all the, all these great descriptions of violins, biographies of great builders. It's a family, and it is all male. It's brothers and fathers and sons and whatnot. And but they write in this collective first person. They always use we, and they use this really arch Victorian style, which they're my characters are kind of imitating. And so I was reading some of those books, and doing my research about this. I mean, I live with someone who builds violins, so a lot of research is right there. But I was reading about all kinds of, getting a lot of background on it, and I read some of these books, and I loved this style. It's so sort of decorous, and as it turns out, I mean, they didn't have good ways of capturing images of these instruments, so it was really important that they write this stuff down in exacting detail in this like kind of florid style to describe each instrument. Otherwise, don't have a catalog.
Right.
So, but that's where the tone of it came from. Is like I was reading, is like, well, what if that we was a couple of teenage boys,
That's
and they were writing about, I don't know, like writing about growing up in this oppressive, not really oppressive, but just like really kind of cloistered family setting where I mean, the violin world is a very unique and intense world. Like, and it does seem like in these families that become violin families, it's like a hothouse. And so I wanted to capture this spirit of these two boys with a conjoined perspective and this kind of hothouse world of the violin building business.
Well, at least one person that is on the call here, our ED for Friends of the Winthrop Library, has twin boys that are about that age. So I'm assuming that she particularly enjoyed that. But one question Boo is asking is, were you inspired by other stories of thievery and obsession?
Oh, you mean like real live ones?
Yeah, maybe, or
Or like,
maybe other fictional stories, either way.
I mean, yes, I did a ton of research into the violin business is incredibly corrupt. It's like it's definitely. I mean, I think it's as corrupt as anything in the art world, but maybe more so. Um, and I did a ton of reading about that and just finding out the ins. And in the beginning, I thought that was going to be my focus. I was going to have these brothers turn out to be kind of crooks, and that they'd be swindling, people. The fact that they couldn't be told apart from each other would become part of how they're going to be like tricking people, that old violins and new violins, you can't tell them apart. And then people like to do stuff. I mean, I have a friend who makes violins, and he can make these beautiful copies that are so perfect you can't tell that they're not actually a Guarneri or a Stradivari, and he likes to present them to people. And VM did the same thing. I mean, he is a notorious French builder, and he'd get these great violins from players, and he'd make 10 copies of their violin, and then he'd give them, say, okay, tell me which one's yours, and they wouldn't necessarily be able to. And so that was kind of part of the notion too, is like the twinning was going to be, they're as people, I wanted to make them like so alike that in some way. Anyway, what I found out about these people who spend their lives robbing other people and just being really horrible is that they're just not interesting. They're actually, like, we hear about them too much in the headlines and the news already, like all the time anyway.
Yeah.
And I was just like, they're no different than like Bain Capital or any other financial organization that goes out of its way to rob people and trick them and just capitalize on every possible thing, So I was like, I'm not going to write about those guys. They get enough airtime.
That's fair enough. Well, so Shar says she loves your reading and wants to buy the book, and that also that you left her hanging. And where did the brother go?
Well, you'll just have to find out.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Sorry.
So, as you started reading, one of the quotes that I remember from now a number of years ago, but that writing, and now you didn't specifically read a passage about music, but about violins anyway, that writing about music is like dancing about architecture. Have you heard that quote before? So is it difficult to write about music? What's difficult about it, or what's exciting about it for you? Obviously, you love it yourself. So
Yeah, I mean, it is challenging, and I think there are different challenges to it. One is that, um, you know, it's not very dramatic. So, I mean, like if you're writing about war, you're writing about boxing or horse racing or any other thing you could become obsessed about. It has like built-in narratives to it.
sure,
There's a contest, and and there's some of that in music too. There are contests, but it's mostly aesthetic. It's in private and not terribly dramatic. And the changes that happen to someone as they're playing an instrument are all kind of internal and subtle and not that remarkable from the outside. So it makes for like, what's the drama? And it makes it hard to find that stuff. So that takes some extra work. And for me, because I'm so close to the music world, it's also, it's kind of tricky to know what's going to confuse people, what they're going to be able to catch on to easily enough, what I have to explain, what I don't have to explain, how detailed can I get before they're just like, man, you're so far in the weeds, I can't even follow you anymore. And because to me, it's really obvious. And
right.
so those are challenges, but I love it because I mean, I just love it. I've been confused about what the difference is between music and writing since I was a little kid. So to me, they kind of run together. And like when I hear music, I hear stories, and when I read stuff, I hear music, and there's always music playing in my head. And so I don't, to write about music just feels like it's really inspiring. But
Yeah.
those are the pitfalls. I have to watch out and make sure that I remember I also have to tell a story.
Fair enough. Well, and so Mia's asking, did your inspiration for your stories come from Caradwin's violin making or from your own lifelong interest in fiddles?
It's both. I mean, actually the trajectory of the book comes from, I was starting to research this about the same time that she was she'd been repairing violins for many years and like doing restoration, repair, and setup, and hadn't built a violin ever. And so right around the time I started getting into researching about building, she just also went and built her first violin.
Wow.
And so for a little while there, we were on like parallel tracks where I was reading about all this stuff, and she was then going in and doing a lot of the stuff. And then I get to watch her do it and fix what I wrote because it was all wrong. And then, she built, I think, like 4 violins by the time I was done writing the book. So she was like way further down the road of that, but it did definitely have, like, it was super helpful to have. I couldn't have done it otherwise. I mean, I was basically watching how it's done, in person. And
Right.
during that time, we also went and hung out with a friend of ours in Portland, Maine, John Cooper, who's a great violin builder. He's made, I don't know, 500 violins now.
Wow.
He's one of the best violin builders in the world, and just a character in his own right. But getting to watch him work and be in his shop and hear him talk about violins, and in some ways he's really drawn to the kind of mob persona type thing that goes with being a wheeler dealer in the violin business, but he got out of it, but he still knows how to play that game. So he could tell us good stories that were pretty fun,
That's fantastic. Oh, that's wonderful. And so, of course, I have to ask if you've ever held or touched or played on a Stradivarius.
I have not. I have never played a Stradivarius. I have played an Amati and a Guarneri, and a VM, couple VMs.
Wow.
Yeah, some really nice violins. Some of them are great. And what else? Presenda. I don't know. Yeah, we've seen some nice violins, and I mean, sometimes you're really surprised when you look at them and you play them, and you're just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
John, Cooper would tell the story about the first time he saw a Strad. I guess he was hanging out with some people, and they were handing the violin around the circle and looking at it. And he just thought it was some German thing because it was like it looked to him like a perfect German copy of a Strad. And he was like, yeah, whatever. And he passed it along.
Oh.
Then he was like, oh, let me see that again.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, what are you working on now? Are you sharing that or?
I've been working on I guess it's going to be a novel. It's been a while since I've been able to look at it because school has been such chaos
Right.
with everything transitioning to online, and it's just like a mess, and everyone's worried about budget, and it's
Right.
it's weird times. So I haven't been writing very much. But the book is going to be again kind of all about music, but this time I'm focusing on it's got multiple strands, and I'm looking at Venice, Italy primarily, and the ospedali there, which are asylums for um, for orphans and for sick people and for poor people and for um, reformed prostitutes. And basically there were places where people would go, and they're funded by somewhat by the state, somewhat by the church, but mainly they funded themselves. And they're just kind of amazing institutions, asylums. And what happened was the women in those asylums, if they were musically talented, played and sang. And that's all they did all day. And they became like the best chory orchestra choirs in the world at the time. And they had, that's who Vivaldi wrote for, was for those women. And it's really fascinating. It's just as like the social aspect of it is super interesting. The way that Venice dealt with its people who needed social support is really fascinating. That it worked. I mean, they turned these things into successful businesses that kept people fed and sheltered. And I mean, it was a little. I mean, it's very restrictive, but given the other choices that women had at that time, it was actually a really great choice. Now, most of them would come to a point in their career where they could choose to leave the asylum, or and get married and go out in the world, but they'd never be able to play music again. They'd never be able to see their friends again. They'd never be able to be back inside the asylum. They'd never be able to perform publicly. They wouldn't have their own money. They wouldn't have any independence. They'd live a nice life in a castle maybe, but most of them chose to stay in the asylum because it seemed better. So it's pretty interesting, and I'm trying to use that and write about some contemporary stuff, and I don't know, it's a mess. But
clearly warrants a trip to Venice, though, I think, right? As soon as the travel restrictions are lifted.
We were there. We want to go back, and I've the pictures of like the canals where you can see all the way to the bottom of them. It's like, wow.
Amazing.
Now that the pollution is gone, when we were there, it was really dirty, but that's how it is. But not anymore. Now I think it's probably really beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. You want to be the first folks back there for sure. Yeah.
Love to.
Well, I can't wait to read that book. And when that comes out, among your other books, Trails and Bookstore does carry all of those. So if you're local to the Mettal, definitely put in your order and pick it up curbside. Okay. They're delivering them curbside, so that's good news. And yeah, we just really appreciate you taking your time this evening to join us. Thank you so
you're
much.
Welcome. Thanks.
Absolutely wonderful reading. Wonderful. And I know all of us are going to be excited to pick up whatever we have not already been introduced to. So
yeah,
thank you, Greg.
Okay.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
All right. Take care.
Okay, bye.